Is yours.
Thank you, Angela. I'm gonna share my screen. Just checking. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, nice to meet you all or to be here. I'll go into the presentation in just a second, but yeah, just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about just a brief intro of who I am. Yeah, I started in kind of forestry. Um, Made my way into policy, and now I'm in health. So it's been a kind of an interesting way to get to the desk that I'm sitting at today. And I think that video that was just shared does speak really well to like the need, the value of sharing some of this information across sectors. I'm not a health, I mean, I don't consider myself a health expert or professional. I'm not professionally trained in health sciences, but just through my work and kind of on the job training, I've really learned a lot, and there's a lot of options in for yeah personal or for ongoing continuing competency. So I think this is a really interesting course and workspace to be working in. So excited to be presenting here today. Um, Go over to slide two. All right. So for today, I'll just kind of start with a quick overview of the background, some of the project objectives, and then move into a tour of what the website looks like, um, including a bit about how we moderate the stories and some of our approaches. And then I'll share a bit about our analytical approach, data analysis, and then talk a little bit about what we're doing for engagement and next steps for the project. Hoping to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and discussion. So, um, so thinking about this presentation, kind of given this current state of geopolitics and kind of just state of global order, it's feeling a little chaotic. Feels like globally we're sort of retreating from the liberal democracy, or feels like a bit of a rise in authoritarianism, populism. Um, so it feels like things aren't necessarily, or there's not as many climate change wins in the news these days, but um, it can feel that way. But there's also a lot of really good work going on. In November of last year, the COP30, the Conference of the Parties for the UN, joined for COP30 in Brazil, I believe it was, and during that, they developed a health action plan, which is the first, well, it's the first international climate adaptation document looking at specifically the health adaptation of the health sector. So, I just wanted to point out that climate change is changing. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening today. It can feel scary. um, it's not something we're going to be able to fix in a couple of years. It's going to be the reality that we live with for the rest of our lives. So adapting to the impacts isn't really a choice anymore, at least in our work here where we sit. We don't really feel it to be something that we can just kind of wait for, wait to adapt. So I think this is the point where I wanted to put in our first poll question. So I think Donald, you're going to manage that one. Nice. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So the question just to get a kind of sense or start to feel about what kind of climate event have you been affected with, or do you feel is the most kind of prevalent in your experience to date? Okay, yeah, looking not surprising. There's no right answer, obviously, but wildfire smoke is something that really has been impacting us across Canada, Western Canada for years. It's been in our minds. Same with extreme heat is also up there, 26%. So that's not too surprising given the heat dome and other heat events we've had and salience of it in our news cycles. So not too surprising. I like to see mental health impacts also making a third strong bronze there. So that's good to see that folks are, well, I mean, maybe not good to see that they're identifying that as something affecting your community, but it's good to see that it's being recognized. Okay. So I think I can go back to my slides now, my presentation. Yes, okay. So kind of framed the COP30 as climate work, good climate work that's happening on the international scale. The work is ongoing, but there's also work being done at all levels within Canada as well. Just to kind of give you a bit of a flavor, the federal government came out with the National Adaptation Strategy in 2023. The province of BC launched the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Program or strategy in 2022. And then more recently, the BC Ministry of Health is releasing a climate change and sustainability plan. And then in 2024, BCCDC kind of identified climate adaptation as one of 6 strategic priorities for the center. And so, we see the role of BCCDC, or not we see, but the role is to provide provincial public health leadership on climate adaptation. And it really does require us to understand more deeply and broadly, understand and describe the impacts of climate change. And not just in ways that we understand, but the ways that other people understand it as well. So talking about kind of these levels of action from international to national to kind of provincial and local, it does provide a layered framework to guide climate action so that reduce duplication, kind of really make sure that we're working collaboratively and, rowing in the same direction. Oops, how did I get to the end? 1 second. There, sorry about that. Move this. Okay. So next slide. Um, Within the BCCDC climate adaptation action plan for climate adaptation, there's 3 goals, and the Ecolens project generally addresses or kind of satisfies, works under all 3 goals, but the second goal most specifically or kind of yeah squarely. So the idea of our work embracing ecological interconnectedness is on the bottom of the screen, kind of moving from the idea of dominance in the environment to one of kind of a one health idea, planetary health. Kind of we're within environmental ecological systems that we can't control. We can't control the weather, so we have to work within it. And so historically, most of the information we collect is quantitative, it's measurable, but a lot of the impacts and data coming out about climate change is difficult to quantify. So we both, we need to work with the information we have, but we also need to be looking at what aren't we doing, or what else could we be doing? What are we collecting? What information are we gathering? And what are we sharing? And is that equitable? Are we recognizing all forms of information equally, or that coming in, and then what we're sharing out, is that consumable to people in different walks of life? So I'll move on to, oops. So the second goal, that climate information is gathered and shared equitably. Generally in our work in climate and health, our team has heard growing calls from our partners for a better understanding of how we, as a health system, collect and use qualitative data and storytelling to better capture the kind of the rich information of both individual and community level impacts or success stories of adaptation, um, just general experiences and the different capacities of individuals and communities to adapt and act. It's especially important in recognizing, or I don't like to use the word reconciling, but bringing together Western ways of knowing, Western ideas of science, and then the more traditional indigenous ways of knowing, local knowledge, lived experiences, kind of reframing qualitative methods as and indigenous ways of knowing as science rather than as, something that helps support science. So really recognizing it as is truth, it kind of fills in or calls on a recognized gap in our collective understanding of climate impacts generally. With the data we're currently collecting, traditionally collecting, we miss the contextual nuances of the local perspectives, or the place-based community experiences that aren't well translated or communicated in quantitative traditional surveillance. So within this goal, climate and health information is gathered and shared equitably. There's four sort of objectives, and for the most part, Ecolens uh, calls responds to these calls. So we're looking at ways to integrate qualitative methods and data into some of our surveillance systems, looking at new indicators for ways to track impacts. Yeah, and then building partnerships. We're not the first ones to be doing this, that's for sure. There's a lot of existing work. There's a lot of uh, historical work. There's work happening in other jurisdictions that's very similar to what we're doing. So it's great because we're able to engage with those people and kind of glean information, leading practices from them, and then also like we're able to share what we're gaining because our project it's not the same. That no one else is necessarily doing this. There's similar analogs, but they're not quite the same. So yeah, it's pretty exciting to be able to be doing this work. But before I get into talking actually about the Ecolens platform itself, I'm going to just talk a little bit about Photo Voice. Photo Voice is a participatory action research method that combines photos and then accompanying text generated by participants. This quote says it entrusts cameras in the hands of people to enable them to act as records and potential catalysts for change in their own communities. Generally, Photo Voice requires three attributes. Has to enable people to record and reflect on the strengths and concerns within their community from their own perspective. It needs to promote critical dialogue and knowledge about important issues, and often this is facilitated through events where people come together and they share and then reflect together. And then it also needs to reach policymakers or decision makers to communicate that information to affect real change. There's plenty of advantages to Photo Voice. It allows allows I guess it allows researchers and practitioners to gain the ability to kind of perceive the world through the lens or from the viewpoint of people who live lives that are different than their own, or different than those people that traditionally are in control of the means for making decisions or kind of imagining what's possible. Often we can be really well trained. We can have really great depth of knowledge, but if we don't have the breadth of experience or perspectives, we can often miss a lot of things. we the advantages of photo voice, it's we can kind of collect information and perspectives from those more marginalized voices or voices that aren't often at the table or leading the discussion. Um, yeah, it lets us see things that we wouldn't otherwise see. It encourages involvement and participation. It kind of builds in a bit of agency, so people feel like if they contribute a story to our platform, they they feel like they're part of it. They're part of action. They're part of climate action in a good way, even just by sharing a story. And even if they didn't share a story, just going to the site and kind of participating, viewing, is also action in itself. It's learning. So um, photo voice also can kind of reaffirm or redefine program goals. So we have an existing program and it requires a certain number of assumptions that we're making about a situation, a community. We won't have the full story. So it can either by gathering and bringing in this additional kind of contextual information, it can reaffirm that yes, this project or program is going in the right direction, or kind of rescope it. So I think that's pretty exciting. That's something to be happen. It's going to happen as the program evolves, the project evolves. But um, and then I guess there's a couple other benefits, not to us, the benefits to the community. So it is publicly available, so teachers can use it in their classrooms, or it can be used by community in different ways. So talk a bit more about that once I go walk through the website a bit. Um, there's also some challenges with photo voice. Um, First and mainly, I think, is the subjectivity of like what's not captured. Um, so yeah, that's the case with all data collection. Is there's always going to be you're missing out on the unknown unknowns. Um, Data collection is quite simple, but analysis is complex. And I'll talk about that later on in the presentation. Um, Political involvement, that's not necessarily, we're thinking of government involved impeding the project, but more political actors from the left or the right wanting to communicate, or maybe from anti-climate organizations maybe want to kind of dilute our pool of stories with their own perspectives. Also, on the left of the political spectrum, it could be that there's intense pressure to do something, bring politics into it. We do really want to keep this politically neutral. So I'll talk about moderation later on in the presentation as well. Obviously, there's a potential for re-traumatizing viewers or participants, asking them to, review or read stories that may bring up old memories or old past trauma. One area we haven't had an issue yet, but it's a challenge, is people submitting stories or photos we don't know where they came from. They might be copyrighted, taken from somewhere else on the internet, and we don't necessarily know. There's also opportunities for AI and fake imagery, or imagery that's misleading. And then obviously a lot of thought and consideration going into OCAP, the ownership, control, access, and possession of the information shared. And at this point, yeah, this is the second poll question. There it is. Okay, so yeah, what do you think is the main value of lived experiences and stories for public health? Just no right answer again. Just wanted to gauge what you folks feel. This one's a lot closer than the last one, which is good. All right. Yeah, I think obviously they're all, I made the question and the answers, so I feel like they're all true values or true benefits, but it's nice to see that there's a bit of a mix. Yeah, I think I agree. A little surprised that highlighting community strengths and adaptive capacity is lower, but I think I'll come back to that thought later in the presentation. Okay, so now that I've kind of talked about the background and kind of background of the project, um, get into what is Ecolens. Angela kind of briefed a little bit at the beginning, and maybe some of you have had a chance to check out the website itself, but for those who haven't, it's what we see as a low barrier platform for people in BC to share personal reflections about how climate change is affecting the lives, the communities, or in their environments. So it's both a science project and an art project, which I think is the piece that we're really adapting to ourselves. In our office generally, we're very good at the science, but the art part of it feels a little new to some of us, myself included. Um, and I think it's not a bad feeling. It's kind of an exciting feeling, to be honest. Um, Part of our effort is to better understand local impacts and lived experiences with traditional surveillance methods that we can't always capture. So um, stories are submitted through the website. There's also a mobile version, so you can use your phone. Um, it's visualized on an interactive website or a map. And each story is short. It's about, 100 words, 700 characters, something like that, and paired with a photo or an image. So it doesn't have to be a photo. It can be I guess it could be a photo of like, let's say a poem that you wrote or something. It doesn't have to, there's no right form of art. We only don't accept videos because we don't have the capacity or capability on the website currently. Um, yeah, so our goal is to collect place-based, emotion-rich data that can help build empathy and collective action, and kind of collecting information that can help inform policy and policy decisions. We work a bit or closely with, like I had mentioned before, there's a lot of people doing similar work, and at the University of Victoria, there's a climate disaster project, and they work more looking at gathering stories after disaster or tragic events, or specifically, yeah, like disaster-driven stories. Um, Whereas here, we're not necessarily just focused on those negative stories. We're looking at just kind of any thoughts, anything good or bad, or neutral. So um, I had mentioned it's low barrier, and that idea is that we don't want to require people to create a username and kind of link it to their Facebook account or something. It can be very simple. Um, yeah, I guess I'll kind of go into that in a later slide. The logo, we were really lucky to be able to work with Jamin Zarowski from the Namgis First Nation. He designed the logo for us. We really love it. It's an eye, represents kind of the human perspective. It's looking at you. It feels like kind of looking out towards you. It feels, almost like a conversation you're having. At least that's how I see the eye. Um, the feathers around the edge, they symbolize hope, courage, and strength. The leaves inside the feathers reflect growth, regeneration, and nature. It's yeah, it's I think we were all really blown away with, or impressed with the creativity, Jamin's creativity. So And I think he's designed a logo for the FIFA 2026 World Cup, which is pretty cool too. Actually, on the website, there is a separate page kind of going into more information about the logo, but I'll leave it there for this. So this is the point where I'm going to go kind of walk through a virtual tour of the website. Rather than trying to share my screen and go through it, there's some screen captures. So this is kind of like the welcome screen. On the top, it kind of directs you into either exploring existing stories or sharing your own story. So here's in the explore side, it starts you out on the grid view, and you can switch to map view, which I'll show in the next slide. And on the left, there's filters, so you can filter by region within the province, different themes within the content, and a date range. So you can say, I'm looking for air quality and mental health impacts between X and Y date in the lower mainland. And as you can see, this shows 8 of 11 results. So at the time that this screenshot was taken, there were 11 stories that were related to air quality in this region. So, and then so that's the grid view. And then if you switch to the map view, it gives you a Google map and with pins for each story. If you click on the pin, it gives you a little bit more info. If you click on the arrow, gives you this is what a story looks like. The photos don't have to be taken with a special camera. They can be, it's less about the right photo and more about the right story or what the photo and story tell together. There's an option for people to like the photo, and the hearts kind of accumulate. And then at the bottom, it's kind of the screenshot doesn't quite capture it, but if you were to scroll down, that you may also be interested in, and it shows you a bit of a rolling gallery of other stories that are related to the themes that you selected. Okay, so that was the explore side, and then the share side, share your story side. Give a bit of information about what we're looking for, what you can expect. We talk about the moderation process, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, and sharing more if you choose. The low barrier side is we do ask for more information, but it's optional. People don't have to submit it. Their story will still be posted, but if they are interested in sharing more, we do ask a few more questions that I'll get to. There's a privacy and confidentiality page. They have to confirm that they agree to these risks and benefits. And then the upload process is nine steps. The first, you upload your photo, then you give it a title and the date that the photo was taken or the story happened, the location on the map so we can place it on our map, and then the story. The first 4 are required or mandatory. The rest are optional. So they can self-select their own themes that they feel it fits under, or if they don't, we can do that on our end. We ask for additional thoughts. So they share a story, and we ask a question, something along the lines of, what do you think would help you be better prepared for or adapted to this risk? What are some solutions that you think? And that was our attempt to remove this strictly from a doom and gloom to inviting them, submitters, to also think about what their ideas, what if they have any ideas for what they can be doing as an individual, their community can be doing, or government broadly. It's open. So I think that's that 6 is a really neat one. And we've gotten some really thoughtful responses already. So really exciting stuff. Demographics, we ask a bit about, optional, obviously, age range, sex, whether you have the financial means to kind of cover your day-to-day expenses, to kind of get at to understand without asking people, are you poor or something like that, to be a little bit more get a bit of a perspective into what their what their own kind of their social and material kind of resources are. So if you're quite wealthy and you have air conditioning in your home, you're not going to be as impacted by a heat wave as someone who doesn't. So, or food scarcity, if you're already having trouble making ends meet and something happens, food becomes more expensive, or access becomes more limited, it can affect people differently. So the demographics are a way for us to get a little bit more information about who's submitting these stories without requiring it, and then potentially losing submissions that people would otherwise submit it if we hadn't required these kind of demographic questions. So, okay, so privacy and moderation is a big one that we've really focused on with this project. People will submit a story, but it's drafted, and then we come in from the back end and can review it, make sure it aligns with the goals of the project. So this helps us ensure that the posts are, oh my goodness, excuse me, the posts are relevant, to the goals of the project. They're respectful in tone. They're not, hateful. They don't include identifying information about people that could compromise their privacy, or the images are appropriate to be shared. We haven't had anything wild yet, but the day I'm sure will come where we'll have some strange submission that we're glad that we have this process in place so that we can moderate it, redact, or lightly edit submissions so that they're more clear, but wanting to really maintain or preserve the original voice of the person who submitted the story. So we're only going to change things if it says like my neighbor Bob said, to just say my neighbor said, little things like that just remove the personal identification, or whatever it is that just to make it kind of align with our moderation protocol. It's also worth noting that stories aren't posted instantly. It's a short delay. We aim to have them posted between 2 to 3 business days while we approve them. So we don't want to make people wait like, oh, when's my post up? Or, not see, or you put the effort into writing up a story. You expect it to be up there. So we want to honor that. But if a submission doesn't clearly fit the scope of the project, we can, if the person provided their email address, we can follow up. And this happened once where somebody forgot to attach a photo. So I was able to follow up and they sent the photo and we were able to link them. So that was great. People that don't submit like the optional email address, if they don't submit it, we don't have a way to reach out to them. And unfortunately, we will hold a story from publication if it doesn't fit the scope, if it's missing information. For analysis, we're using qualitative software called NVivo. I'm sure, Chance, you probably heard of it or maybe even use it. I used it during my master's and it was very, very helpful for my project then. And it's working really well for this project too. So once a story is submitted and approved, we analyze the information, both the photo, but also the text, the story, using kind of thematic coding through NVivo. And it's an inductive method for analysis. Focuses on identifying key themes, patterns within stories or cross stories that inform future themes and or future reports and dashboards that we'll create. So we read the story, kind of get to know what they're getting at, and then within that story, identify code labels of text with pre-identified codes. So this could be something positive versus negative, an action versus an impact. If someone's identifying an issue or a solution, there's a lot of different ways you could code it, or if they're talking about mental health impacts, physical health impacts, And over, once you layer this over all of the stories, you can kind of start to see the forest for the trees. And then as you go, there's going to be stories that um, contain information that we haven't experienced before or we haven't previously coded. So there'll be new codes that we develop, and then themes. I'll talk about a few themes that are kind of starting to emerge, but this is really kind of where I think the really interesting nuance of some of these stories comes out. Um, so as the data set grows, we'll explore ways to kind of surface new or emerging insights that matter to different programs or projects across the health system. So there has been a lot of interest in this project from some of our health colleagues, so that is extremely encouraging. Um, and so this is an example of an emerging theme, um, generally speaking about environmental changes to habitats and ecosystems. Um, so stories in this theme often focus on shifts in like local wildlife, changing cycles. This one talking about changes in pollen cycles, which I'm quite affected by allergies myself, so I really appreciated this story. It wasn't my story that I submitted, but yeah, even talking about algae blooms, dry riverbeds, just notices, observations of strange states of nature. Um, they don't even always have to be true. Like they can be, there's a story about somebody passing a tree on their way to work, and that tree is dying, and it may be caused by climate change, but it makes them feel climate change, or it reminds them of it. So there is no like right or wrong story. Is if it's a story that talks about climate change, talks about health, it's related. It's it's related to experiences living in British Columbia. Um, they're all good stories. Um, and yeah, these stories kind of allow people to express themselves like with written firsthand accounts. Um, and yeah, I think it's really interesting once you actually kind of start teasing out what's in the stories themselves, because 100 words isn't very much space to communicate, but there is a lot of communication, a lot of important detail in that. A second theme, obviously looking at physical and mental health impacts. Those are, I'd say the majority of our stories are about both, or one or the other, or sometimes both physical and mental health. Yeah, often speaking to respiratory issues from wildfire smoke, heat exhaustion, or the emotional toll of watching, your landscape or your environment change. The idea of eco anxiety, of solastalgia, is that the word? Yeah, about kind of the longing for a state of the world that doesn't exist anymore. It can bring up feelings of anxiety, of depression, so or even just you know worrying about the future generation. Should I have kids? Are my kids going to be okay? Um, it can take a wide variety of impacts. And I think one thing this project does is kind of highlight or validate the mental health impacts. It can often feel like physical health impacts are truer, or they're more real. But for someone experiencing any form of mental health impact, even if it's just a brief feeling of dread, that's just as real, and it can affect you, your mood, your health in really emotional, or really, what's the word, real ways. So the mental health component is quite strong in this project. Um, and specifically, there's kind of it's almost another like a sub theme of the physical and mental health impacts. There's this third theme of specifically eco grief as its own distinct theme. The sense of loss, helplessness, mourning. Um, Interestingly, yeah, these stories often speak to like an intergenerational fear, or cultural traditions at risk. And I would have said a couple of years ago that that would have applied to indigenous people who have, you know, histories of intergenerational trauma, or cultural traditions that are at risk, and that exists whether climate change is real or not. But it's interesting to kind of allow myself to see that even like white settlers like ourselves have cultures and traditions as well that are really valid. So the one on the top left, the story was talking about a newcomer to Canada that their first snowfall, it happened in the evening, and they had a playlist in and they walked around their community. And then every year when the first snow falls, they find that same playlist and they do a little walk through the neighborhood and just enjoy the feeling of snow falling on them. And the story talked about fears that someday like their kids won't get to experience it, or they may even lose out on the tradition. This winter is a good example where we really, in Vancouver itself, haven't really had what I feel is a true winter. So that story itself is a really interesting case of it's a good example of a tradition, a cultural tradition for that individual that's being at risk. So um, yeah, like I said, the emotional responses are just as valid as a physical health impact or response, and just as important to capture for our adaptation strategies as a health system. Also remind us that climate resilience means acknowledging grief is real, and that communities need help to process it, or they need space to process it themselves in whichever way they choose. Okay, looking at time, the next steps, I think I've only got a couple slides left. Yeah. Um, yeah, kind of looking back to one of the earlier slides talking about the objective of integrating qualitative methods with conventional surveillance. One of our first steps, or I guess pathways for what we do with this information, is related to Angela and the Shiny app that she developed, um, which takes quantitative, yeah, quantitative data and kind of puts it all into one sort of platform or application. And there's a good opportunity to incorporate these stories into this app. There's also community health profiles that BCCDC and few other organizations collect and report out on. So the community health service kind of CHSA size of area. So once we have enough stories or a couple stories within a CHSA, we can include those in the health profile itself. We have a number of other partners that have identified future uses for this. Once the develop the repository of stories kind of builds up, and we have a larger, we have I think 58 stories right now. So it's definitely not nothing. We've got some great ones, but we're always looking to collect more. Um, Also, as we collect more, our analysis will have more insights to speak of. We'll be able to report out, depending on maybe an annual report of just what we've heard in the last year. Um, we can address specific questions that some of our health colleagues may have, and obviously there's going to be a need or ongoing need to continually engage with communities that are underrepresented in some of the stories that are submitted. So if we're finding there's no seniors submitting stories, maybe we'll need to do some targeted outreach for that. So yeah, I think that is the presentation. I have the third poll question, I think is ready when you are. Yeah, this question is a bit for me. Wondering from your perspective, what would you think would be a good priority for Ecolens to kind of prioritize for next steps? So yeah, I'm seeing a stronger integration with surveillance data being a pretty strong leader, which I think is, yeah, speaks to it's great to collect the information, but we also have to do something with it. So um, yeah, that'll be a really important one. Yeah, this is another question where they're all pretty even, which is good. It means we've got a lot of work to do, and we need to spread our work out across a lot of these areas. Um, that's great. Okay, well that's it. Thank you so much for your time. This is really a collaborative effort. We've had a lot of really helpful partners in this. I encourage you all to explore the site, to check it out. If you have a, if I'm sure you can rack your brain and maybe your phone scroll through your photos and see if you have any photos that tell a story from your community or your perspective. Um, Also encourage you to share Ecolens with your networks. Um, yeah, we're looking for ways to, you know, get it further and wider to broader audiences. So yeah, anything you can do to help us would be great. But if not, just thanks for giving me the time to meet and present to you.
Thank you very much.